Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. This week, we are covering a lot. Iran and Israel, Operation Midnight Hammer, the Texas Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, Bitcoin as an asset for mortgages, the big Bitcoin Policy Summit. Maybe we'll touch on the Big Beautiful Bill a little bit and much more. Zach, where do you want to start today?
Yes. Well, let's start with things happening over in the Middle East. So a lot has happened since we recorded our last episode. When we had recorded our last episode, Iran and Israel had just been trading missiles for a few days. Markets were a bit up, they were a bit down, and then a lot changed. We had an Iranian crypto exchange was hacked and $90 million disappeared. President Trump took a very public, deep breath. Some would maybe even say uncharacteristically, said he'll decide what steps to take within the next 2 weeks. And then 2 days later came Operation Midnight Hammer, perhaps the largest military action the U.S. has taken against Iran. Iran threatened retaliation, shot some missiles at a base in Qatar, which were mostly shot down by Qatari forces. And then there was the announcement of ceasefire, some peace talks, and a bit of saber rattling. So again, a lot has changed and a lot to unpack here, Brian. But what's the latest on the Iran-Israel crisis, the geopolitics of it, and what have you seen in the markets generally?
Yeah, the markets have digested it reasonably well. Oil prices have kind of stabilized in the 60s. That was a huge topic of debate, that any kind of action against Iran could, double the price of oil. That's what every, expert thought was like destined to happen. It didn't happen. It went up into the 70s and then stabilized back down in the 60s. Gold has went up and has kind of stabilized. The S&P is nearing record highs. I think pretty much the entire market's nearing record highs at this point. So following the Liberation Day tariff meltdown, and then the meltdown over what could happen in the Middle East, all of it has kind of smoothed out for now. And I would say, look, the president campaigned on not getting embroiled in protracted conflicts. He had a very specific goal of eliminating Iran's nuclear program. He did that and then immediately called for peace. So I think it's also a testament to, particularly on the price of oil and the energy side, the U.S. being energy independent now and a net exporter of energy. It shows that we're no longer quite as dependent on that area of the world, and so I think the combination of kind of the evolution of America's economy, particularly the energy economy, and then President Trump's stated desire not to have protracted conflicts, I think kind of helped bake this cake. And so things are fairly stable. And we'll see what happens. Now the shift, he was at the NATO summit, now he's back. The domestic focus is on the Big Beautiful Bill. And we can get into that a little bit maybe later. But the markets digested these things pretty well. It's like everything was priced in almost.
It's a good reminder. I mean, maybe it's just a reminder for me, but I remember at the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, it's like I wanted to watch TV news 24 hours a day for like the first 3 days, and the same thing with Israel and Iran. And as huge and consequential as these things are, and in the case of war, people's lives, but sometimes it's so easy to get wrapped up in the frenzy and the concern about things, but that you take a longer view as a person or as a market even, things kind of do level out. And so, tariffs are on, tariffs are off, trade with Canada's on, trade with Canada's off. It does, I think the phrase you kind of use, it's kind of baked in to things. And so good reminder to all take maybe a collective breath. And so you had talked about various markets, oil, gold, the stock market, and those kinds of things. But I want to go back to the price of Bitcoin, because again, a lot has changed. In our last episode, we quoted Kathleen Brooks, who was the research director for a foreign exchange broker, XTB, and she said the situation in the Middle East would need to deteriorate rapidly and enter a more dangerous phase for Bitcoin to fall below $100,000. And Operation Midnight Hammer was a pretty significant moment. And on June 22nd, Bitcoin did fall to the lowest I saw was $98,635. Maybe it was, within a few dollars here or there. For a very short period of time, less than a few hours. Then it climbed back over 100,000 and it settled in the 107,000 range. So maybe it's, similar to what you said with the other markets. But Brian, what's your take on how Bitcoin has responded to, and again, this is, I'm doing exact opposite of what I just said, but how has Bitcoin responded to what some people were calling a potential World War III moment?
Yeah, I think the market for Bitcoin has matured quite a bit. And I think I've talked about this in previous episodes, but it was merely a risk-on asset for most of its life, where people would sort of bet. It was almost like a bet rather than an investment. And so as soon as conditions became less certain, that was one of the first assets that people would sell, and then go to whatever safer asset you would they considered, like bonds or cash, money markets, whatever. And now it is. I think there's enough liquidity in the market, enough maturity, enough knowledge of what it is and what it isn't, that maybe we won't see this wild volatility like we have over the course of the life of Bitcoin. And that was sort of a hypothesis, not just mine, but shared by many, that the volatility would start to smooth out as more institutions came in, the liquidity ocean under Bitcoin became much deeper. And I think we're seeing that. Now we've had this snapshot in time could be telling of what the future holds, which is Bitcoin, at least to the extent it's an investment product. It's many things, obviously, a network, a currency, a commodity. I think on the kind of commodity investment portion of what Bitcoin is, it's behaving more like gold. It's becoming a haven, precious metal type inflation hedge, more like gold, and that's why you're seeing that volatility smooth out, with sovereigns and some of the largest institutions getting involved. I don't know if you saw Rick Edelman, one of the biggest wealth advisors in the country, said people should be increasing their holdings of, I think he used the C word, crypto, which Bitcoin and crypto are not really synonyms, but he was advocating for like 10% for cautious investors and 40% for aggressive investors. That is quite a statement, considering BlackRock, who is now the Bitcoin PR department, is, I think, still in like the 2 to 5% recommendation range. But it's just another data point in this journey that shows that the Bitcoin market has matured quite a bit, and it's played out here. This was a very poignant test for it, and I think it worked out very well.
Yes. Well, as someone who grew up in flyover country and you only maybe have a few radio stations at a time, Rick Edelman was always a big voice for us there. So it's interesting to hear his take on it. Well, that was great to get us kind of caught up on where we're at on the world stage. Now we'll head back to the center of the national stage. We were together last week in Washington, D.C. at the Bitcoin Policy Summit. It was really an incredible policy summit. And I'm one of those like nerds that I literally sit through like all the panels and I'm like, this is awesome. But there were some really incredible panels. We had great meals, social events, and a chance to meet people from so many different Bitcoin backgrounds and perspectives. And then Thursday, I spent the day with dozens of fellow Bitcoiners, literally burning shoe leather as we walked through 110-degree heat and humidity, sharing the gospel of Bitcoin with lawmakers and their staff. So First of all, Brian, what were your overall takeaways from this year's? It was, I think, the third annual policy summit.
Yeah. Look, there were a lot of really informative, educational, entertaining talks. The way they did the format, where it was short and just kind of rapid fire of important point, made it very rich in content. But I would say one thing that really stood out to me was how big it's grown. And there's somebody there who asked me, oh, have you been before? How does this year's compare? And I said, yes, I've been. And this year's is much bigger. It used to be just people I knew. And now it's all the people that I knew from this world, plus like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5x more people that are getting involved in the industry that see the promise of it. It just shows how far we've come. So I wanted to actually, the summit was great, but I wanted to take a moment to help understand how we got here and how it got mainstreamed. And some of the credit goes to President Trump, but we want to, I wanted to do a little walk down memory lane quickly here. So in the January of 2024, your predecessor on this pod, Sam, and I did a lot of research on who are Bitcoin voters, who are these people, could they maybe have an impact on the election. This was towards the end of the Biden administration, which was an extremely hostile administration for our industry. So we were brainstorming and trying to think of what can we do to make things better. And one of the things we wanted to do was determine like who cares about this. How can we enlist, a little Bitcoin army to help spread the good news of what we're doing and why it's good for the world, why it's good for America. And so we did research. We figured out who these voters are. We learned they're younger, they are diverse, they're across demographics, they're across political lines. They are not necessarily loyal to a party. They don't necessarily vote all the time. So if you can speak to them, you all of a sudden are introducing an entirely new section of the electorate. And so the first headline I'll highlight here is one of Sam's articles, Why Crypto Could Swing the 2024 Election. And that's where we walk through this data. And we sent memos, by the way, to the campaign and to the president's campaign, and to kind of flag this issue for them and let them know, hey, there might be an untapped market of voters here, for your consideration. And we did more thinking on it. We did more research, and then we realized that there is this whole untapped market of voters who really care about this, who want alternatives to the legacy financial system, who aren't typically involved in politics, but who could get involved if you start speaking to them. And there's nobody who really hates Bitcoin. Like there isn't like an anti-Bitcoin voter, except for some fringe groups on the way, way, way far left. But actually, Bitcoin owners are more Democrats, slightly more Democrats than Republicans. They're more independents than anything else. So the idea we got from our research was, Trump had come a long way. He, right around this time in January 2024, had given a speech about why central bank digital currencies, or it wasn't just about that, but he talked about it at a rally. Central bank digital currencies are not good. And he said he would never allow one on his watch. He got resounding applause. And I think that kind of surprised him. He had heard it from Vivek Ramaswamy and others, like, you should talk about this. People really are thinking about it. So he did. He got a huge round of applause that CBDCs are bad. Then the next sort of stage in that evolution is, well, you should probably embrace the opposite of a CBDC, which is Bitcoin, which is decentralized money. And so I wrote this next article, Why Embracing Bitcoin Would Be a Low Risk, High Reward Strategy for Trump. And again, that's about unlocking this untapped voting block. And there's really no people who hate it. It's only upside and virtually no downside. So we published that. That got a good amount of traction. And then Sam followed it up with his next headline, How Trump's Bitcoin Evolution Could Scramble the Electoral Map. That's when he really started to become a lot more friendly to it. And again, talking about who this audience is and why it matters. So then fast forward, I want to fast forward, and then I'm going to go back again to memory lane to the conference. You asked what a big takeaway from the Bitcoin Policy Summit was. Here was one. There was a number of excellent presentations on data, on who's adopting Bitcoin, how fast it's happening, what parts of the world, what's the ideological makeup. There's tremendous presentations at this conference. So I don't want to play favorites, but there was one slide that I thought kind of encapsulated. So without boring everybody to death with a million pieces of data, this one from Signal Polling and Analytics, I think is helpful. So when he went all in on hodling, crypto messaging, why people should have the right to participate, why they should have the right to own Bitcoin, why you should be able to, keep your own keys. This sparked a huge shift in the electorate. So Bitcoiners, of which there are millions and millions, I believe the data, I've seen various sources. Coinbase is one, but I think there are a number of other sources. Troy Cross has done some great research. It all sort of circles around the same number of about 50 million Americans. 50 million Americans are hodling Bitcoin. That is a massive number of people who are either extremely passionate about it or certainly are passionate about the right to hold it, the right to be invested in this, the right to look for financial alternatives. So again, back to the Signal slide, when the Dems, the prior administration, was extremely hostile to this idea. They were in favor of more centralized control. And the Bitcoin voters, again, who are Republicans, Democrats, Independents, they're all over the map. When they learned about Trump's messaging, contrasted it with the Biden administration's track record, they went overwhelmingly for Trump. So that's why this slide, I think, is illustrative of a lot of the research that was presented, and by people who were not political, people who were professors at universities, who were trying to find unbiased information to see what's going on in this market, what's going on with these voters, what's going on with these people around the world. So it showed that when Trump started to adopt this, Bitcoin values, I'll call it, messaging of your freedom, your independence, I'm reading from the slide a little bit, but it gets to your own financial sovereignty, I think, is what started to really resonate with people. And it swung a huge number of voters. And then CNN even reported that you could make a really strong argument that Bitcoin and crypto voters swung the election. Because remember, there's only 7 swing states, and they aren't decided by that many voters. And when you're talking about 50 million Americans, that means there are at least tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or more in these swing states. It's not hard to get to that argument that Bitcoin and crypto voters, these issues, this messaging really swung the election. And our work on the Bitcoin Voter Project, we know we have data that shows we turned out enough voters to flip Pennsylvania for Senator Dave McCormick. So that's a huge takeaway from the conference. I know I'm filibustering here, so jump in at any point, but I wanted to then jump back to the Trump journey for just a moment, because some of our other writings on this along the way, I think Sam and I actually kind of created interesting little mile markers on this evolution. And I wrote this op-ed, Trump is the best choice for Bitcoin, in Bitcoin Magazine. Don Jr., who is a very nice guy, he was kind enough to tweet this out. Well, he's not nice to everybody. He's not nice to haters and losers, but he's nice to me. And so he tweeted out, Trump is the best choice for Bitcoin. And then when we met with the president to talk to him about Bitcoin mining, how the industry works, why we should want it in America, we showed him that article and shared that it was the highest rated or trafficked or clicked article in the history of Bitcoin Magazine, which is really saying something, because they have a global readership. They have, 3 or 4 million followers or something on Twitter alone. And I remember the president's quote was "Welcome to ratings," which was hilarious and great. But um, and also we discussed the energy implications and why Bitcoin mining as a flexible power load is actually going to be really helpful, not just for getting hash rate in the US, making sure the US is capturing the value of Bitcoin, but it's also a great business model to help build power infrastructure for AI, which he's extremely concerned with. He wants the US to win the AI race against China. And then here was his tweet coming out of a number, sort of culmination of a lot of these conversations, showing that he's against the CBDC. Far left, like literal communists, like in China, are in favor of CBDCs. We want Bitcoin, and how Bitcoin mining will help us get to that energy dominance phase for tech. The next mile marker, he came to the Bitcoin conference, repudiated sort of the Biden approach, said he would fire Gary Gensler, got a standing ovation, talked about a lot of these issues. And then this year's Bitcoin conference, of course, had Vice President Vance saying that, the industry now has an ally in the White House. And that was really an impressive mile marker. And then just this week, the president from the White House podium in the press room said Bitcoin takes a lot of pressure off the dollar and it's a great thing for our country. So I just wanted to use your question about the Bitcoin Policy Summit as a hook to walk us down that memory lane of how we got to where we are. And it's the power of these Bitcoin voters and the values behind it of freedom, self-sovereignty, the ability to hedge against, runaway spending and things like that, that I think got the voters' attention, that got the president's attention. He, of course, was debanked. That was another big issue where he, I think, helped persuade him to move away from a CBDC and towards Bitcoin. The politicization of the financial system he saw as very harmful. And so this alternative helping usher in alternative financial system, I think was very persuasive. And it led right up to this week where he even said it's a great thing for our country. And some of the data at the BPI summit shows that this evolution that's been happening in the electorate, politics flows downhill from culture. The culture has been embracing it. The president is very astute at reading tea leaves and seeing where people are headed. He got on that train at the right time, and now he is maybe the greatest evangelist for Bitcoin. I know people don't like to see it politicized, and that's fair. But the president's evolution on this has been remarkable. And now with him in the White House, very good for the industry. End of rant. Thank you for indulging me. That was way too long, but end of rant.
Well, but the bully pulpit is a powerful tool, and presidents have used it since the beginning to advance particular policy positions. A couple things that stood out to me when you had mentioned Trump got a big round of applause and that kind of stood out to him. I referenced this article so many times with people, but it was in 2015 before the election. It was a Forbes article and it said everything is pro wrestling. And it talked about how, the influence that WWE and Vince McMahon had over Trump and he participated in it. So I do think that kind of stuff, he hears that it's what you call in wrestling terms, you call it a pop. You say something and wow, it really resonates with the audience. So he, I think, is very, very keyed into, people call it populism, but it's what the people, want. One of the things as well that was neat for me is we had the panels throughout the day, and then that evening we had a dinner, and I was at a table, and then after the dinner, just kind of sitting around talking to people. There's probably about 6 or 7 of us, and you don't get that deep into politics with people you just first meet. But I would guess that all 6 people at that table were very, very progressive. And it was just a fascinating conversation. And it goes to that point. which we know and can sense from participating in these panels that and these events, that you see that philosophical those various philosophical views, but which, as you just very very well captured, the data bears that out empirically. So that was really a neat thing to see, and maybe sat with one or two of those professors that night was great. And then the last thing is you're right about Don Jr. He came to Iowa and was at a fundraiser for a congressman there, and it was at a small hole in the wall place, and people had been out pheasant hunting all day, and he was very, very kind and generous. So it's easy to just throw barbs at people in the Trump family, but they are nice people. I want to pivot over. You kind of you ended what you were just saying, talking about freedom and opportunity and how that resonates with voters in the United States and potentially in swing states. But what stood out to me is that this isn't just a local phenomenon to the United States. Bitcoin is a tool around the world. And there was an amazing series of panels. There were dissidents from Venezuela, Iran, other oppressive regimes who told their stories about how Bitcoin has been used, not by the government to oppress its people, but by oppressed people to fight back for freedom, speech, education. I'm so sorry I've forgotten her name, but there was the gal from Afghanistan who talked about using it as a tool to fund educating young girls for values like human rights and economic opportunity. So we just spent a lot of time talking about this, but it's easy to get caught up in the big policy debates, the flashy technology, the markets, how it's a great tool as an investment. Bitcoin is all of those things. But can we take a step back and can you, Brian, talk about some of the benefits of Bitcoin to individuals, small businesses, and everyday people? And this is all across the world, from every language, people group, and country. What are the benefits to people?
Yeah, I mean, well, Alex Gladstein from the Human Rights Foundation has been talking for many years about how Bitcoin is a tool for freedom, particularly in oppressive regimes. And I've heard personal anecdotes from people fleeing from Eastern Bloc countries, from other places where if you are at odds with the government leadership, your bank account's frozen, your assets are frozen, you're probably going to jail. People forget that America's model is unique. I mean, throughout history, people will do almost anything to maintain power. And there are a number of countries, for example, in Africa with hyperinflation, where people are trying to protect their wealth and keep their families out of poverty with it. But the elimination of intermediaries, of banks and governments, and the ability of people to hold their own virtual assets without anyone, on a decentralized network where no bank, no government can censor you. That is revolutionary and has made a lot of people's lives much better. There's an interesting guy. I don't know him personally. I just know him by reputation. But Peter McCormick, I believe he is a Brit. He owns like a club soccer team over there and in Bedford, and his statement, I think, sticks out to me, that any business can be a Bitcoin business, and you can tap into this Bitcoin community of people who are thinking about the future, about what is going to be a better financial system, about what's going to help people protect their wealth better, have peer-to-peer interactions, again, without governments or banks getting in the way. And so he's basically turned his like soccer club and some local businesses in the town into Bitcoin businesses. Any coffee shop can be a Bitcoin coffee shop. Any bar can be a Bitcoin bar. Any clothing store can have a Bitcoin swag collection in it. And you can tap into this vast community of people, of tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people all around the world. I mean, there's, Bitcoin Park in Nashville, and the coffee shop there, you can pay with sats. You just use Strike or Cash App, or, pick your app and tap your phone just like you would Apple Pay, and pay with Bitcoin. And people find that really cool, and they'll go to that shop because of Bitcoin. So it's helping, individuals have more sovereignty over their financial health. It's helping small businesses attract new customers, and it's global. I mean, think about processing transactions across borders. Still to this day requires multiple banks, clearing processes. It can take days, and there's lots of fees. Bitcoin is, nearly instantaneous and extremely cheap. So faster, cheaper, more secure payments is going to unlock so much capital and so much growth in the world. It's good for people. It's good for small businesses, and it's really good for the evolution, I think, of the global economy. So it was great to hear a lot of these testimonials. In the last number of years, policymakers would always ask, but what's the use case? Everything's fine now, right? We don't need this. And at the Bitcoin Policy Summit, and shout out to Grant and David and Steven and the whole team over there for putting on a great event, we heard hundreds of use cases this week. There should be no doubt that people all around the world, including 50 million Americans, find this asset extremely useful. So, that's just a walk through some of the dozens and dozens of really positive experiences people have had with it.
Yeah. Well, there's so much more we could talk about in DC, but I want to selfishly bring it back here to Texas. And a story that we've been following for a while is that Texas Governor Greg Abbott has finally signed SB 21 into law. So Texas now has the most robust state Bitcoin reserve in the United States. And we have talked about it before, but Brian, can you give us a final sort of status update on where the bill ended up, how much money Texas is going to spend, and what's the role that some of our partners played, and how this fits into the broader conversations about sovereign Bitcoin reserves?
So Texas passed their Bitcoin reserve bill, and they appropriated $10 million. So Texas is one of the largest economies in the world. If it were not a state in the United States, if it just stood on its own, it would be, I don't know, I think it oscillates between the 7th or 8th largest economy on earth. So the fact that the state of Texas is now going to be acquiring $10 million worth of Bitcoin, and some of the stated goals are things that we've talked about: hedging against inflation, runaway policies from Washington, protecting Texas residents and taxpayers, the value of their money. I think it's pretty remarkable. It had hit some snags along the way, but we were able to overcome them with the Bitcoin Voter Project and other great advocates. So the comptroller's office, I think, is going to administer this. I believe the legislation still has a provision for like advisors, like an outside advisory board of people who are sort of experts on Bitcoin price cycles and things like that, to give him advice on how to execute this using the prudent investors standard, which is the standard in Texas. So this is a landmark. I mean, this is a very important moment for Bitcoin, for people, for voters, for anybody who has an issue with the value of their dollar not standing the test of time. Looking at a capped supply asset, virtual asset that can go anywhere globally instantaneously. Steal Michael Saylor, one of his many good quotes, gold has been sort of that store of value for a long time. Good luck having a suitcase full of gold bars and getting on a plane and going anywhere. But with Bitcoin, you can use it globally. You can have a wallet in your pocket, and you can move anywhere and protect your wealth, because there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. So this is a wise choice by the Texas legislature, a wise choice by the governor to sign it, and it is a signal that Texas remains the leader, certainly a leader, if not the leader, in digital asset innovation in America. So excellent move. The president established a strategic Bitcoin reserve by executive order, but they're still sorting out how the government's going to acquire Bitcoin. It holds some Bitcoin from previous criminal cases and seized assets, but in terms of how the government's going to build a reserve, that's something they're still working on. Texas maybe is jumping out to a bit of a lead here. It is a competitive space. We often refer to the space race for Bitcoin because it is supply capped. Texas is showing some real leadership here. And congratulations to Senator Schwartner, Representative Capriglione, Governor Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, everybody who got this across the finish line, Speaker Burrows. They all, I think in the eyes of some of their constituents, were taking a risk. I think those of us who live and breathe Bitcoin every day know that it was a very good calculated risk and will be extremely helpful for the state. But good for them for showing leadership and taking on that responsibility and showing that Texas is out front of most other states on this issue. So great success there.
Absolutely. And I just echo it. And you had other states, as we've talked about, Arizona and New Hampshire, who have, taken different approaches. I know in Arizona, they've, kind of focused on, some of the seized assets and forfeiture and things like that to fund things. So it is actually a pretty bold step to appropriate, money to fund this and a not insignificant amount. $10 million is significant. It's not $21 million, but it's not nothing. So kudos to Texas. I want to shift over and just do a couple of quick segments on federal policy. So we will talk about the big beautiful bill. Don't worry. But news that broke during the summit, it was announced on stage. I think it was during Yael's panel. But the Federal Housing Finance Agency Director, William Pulte, issued an order to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to count Bitcoin as an asset to qualify for a mortgage. And writing in Forbes, Becca Bratcher called this a seismic shift for U.S. housing policy. So, Brian, it's important to note that the order is limited to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, so the government can't direct all lenders to do this. But Fannie and Freddie back over half of all mortgages, so this is a game changer. So, what is the effect of this order, and do you see this as a signal to those traditional large lenders, community banks, and the like to similarly recognize these assets?
Yeah, I do, and think about this is like coming full circle, because when we opened the podcast, we talked about how the market for Bitcoin has matured so much that even global events haven't caused spikes in volatility like they used to. But it's also, it's common sense. I mean, think about some of the early adopters, and I wish I was an earlier adopter, of course, but some of these like Bitcoin whales, let's say they have billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. This notion that they shouldn't qualify for financing and is ridiculous. And think about it, and a lot of them are quite savvy. They would, even if they're a billionaire, they wouldn't pay cash for their house because they know that their Bitcoin will appreciate faster than the interest rate on the mortgage. So if you are a really good, frugal, savvy investor, and you have a tremendous stack of Bitcoin, why would that value not count towards your financial health? It's been the government playing catch up, honestly. But good on Pulte for doing this. I think it's a bold step. It is the right step. But it takes some chutzpah to challenge the status quo sometimes, even if it's obviously the right decision to make. I think this will definitely send a signal to the larger financial institutions that if somebody has a lot of wealth in Bitcoin, that counts as wealth. Just because it's not an asset that you're more familiar with or that you've been dealing with for the last 50 years. This has been around for 15, 16 years, and it has been the best performing asset of the last decade. So if somebody has accumulated wealth by having better foresight than you, Mr. Banker, you should still give them credit for that. So I think it's a good, very wise choice and a bold one, and good on Pulte. He's making a name for himself there at a usually kind of sleepy agency. I think his next order of business, at least according to President Trump, is to potentially take Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship and make them profitable private companies again. And we'll see what happens then.
And I was amazed. I went and looked at his tweet, and he's got like, I mean, 2 or 3 million is a big difference, but he's got like 2 million Twitter followers for somebody who's at a pretty sleepy agency. So that was a cool thing to see. And then the last substantive thing we'll touch on today is as we said at the beginning, the big beautiful bill. So another major development this week is that the Senate is scheduled to consider it. They only have 3 votes to lose in the Senate. A couple of senators have signaled concerns over things like Medicaid and tax credits. The House doesn't like what the Senate's done. Where are we at, Brian, on reconciliation today?
Well, let's focus on a very narrow slice. There is a digital asset tax package that the community is advocating to get into this big, beautiful bill. It is common sense. It is excellent policy. Senator Lummis and Senator Blackburn have done yeoman's work on this. It is still not quite there, but we're trying to get it there. And a number of our friends in the industry are pushing for this. Call your senator, email them, tweet at them, tell them to include the digital asset tax package, because it's going to make you, Mr. Bitcoiner's life or Mrs. Bitcoiner's life much better. It will have a de minimis exemption of $600 for Bitcoin transactions, so that you're not paying capital gains or calculating capital gains and paying for accounting overhead if you buy a cup of coffee with sats, like at that coffee shop in Nashville that I mentioned. This de minimis exemption is common sense. It applies in other areas of the law. There's de minimis exemptions if you make a small error on your tax returns. There's de minimis exemptions if you use a foreign currency, and there's been, a relative value change versus the dollar. There is no reason why there is not a de minimis exemption for Bitcoin. So that is key. It would treat Bitcoin when we mine it, when our company mines it, it should be treated like a commodity, like gold or any other commodity. You're not taxed on the value of it when you pull it out of the ground. That wouldn't make any sense. Think of it like gold or an agricultural product. What do you, like, if you're taxed on the value of the corn you're harvesting, what are you going to do? Shave off some kernels off the cob and just to pay the taxes on the corn? No, you sell it. When you sell the commodity, you are then taxed, minus the cost of goods sold, if you will. Bitcoin should be treated the same way, so that miners, think of not just corporate or industrial scale miners, think of an at-home miner. The person's trying to save for their retirement or education or whatever it may be. So they're trying to mine, have a little at-home miner. The way it's treated now, they would have to sell that Bitcoin just to pay taxes on that Bitcoin. So it shouldn't be that way. It should be taxed like a commodity, where you're taxed when you sell it. So that's another piece of it. There are a number of things in this that are very good common sense, bringing the tax code into the 21st century so that people can hold and transact with digital assets and not have the IRS telling them, oh, it's too hard, it's too complicated. Like, it's basically where we're at right now. They're being treated unfairly for no reason other than the IRS doesn't know what to do with it. So this package of tax reforms will be extraordinarily popular for the 50 million people who have Bitcoin, anybody who's mining Bitcoin. It will make their lives better. It costs like nothing, basically, because they've worked in some other provisions that would raise revenue in fair, easily to administer ways that would not stifle growth. So this is an extremely important package. Call your senator, email your senator, tweet at your senator to include the digital assets tax package. Senator Scott, chairman of the banking committee, he could help. Let's get him on board. Chairman of finance, Senator Crapo, let's try to get him on board. The majority leader, Senator Thune, let's get him on board. Let them know that you care about this and that it's going to make your life better in a material way, and you will support politicians who support common sense digital asset policies. That's what I wanted to mention on the big, beautiful bill.
And as you said, there's no one that's opposed to this. Senators Lummis and Senator Blackburn, gave a great talk about it at the summit. But there's no opposition to this, and there's so many, there's big ticket things that the chambers and even within the chambers that people are arguing about: Medicaid, SALT, some tax exemptions. There's the AI moratorium and things like that. Those are big things that people are quibbling about. Substantive policy that people are quibbling about. No one's quibbling about this, and so. I know there's a lot of things that go into this, but as Brian said, advocating, sharing your view, elevating this to lawmakers and especially as they're considering these bills. When we used to take a tally in my congressman's office, and what calls did you take? And you'd say, oh, I took calls on 8 topics, and one of those topics I had 50 calls on it. That stands out to lawmakers. So you send a dozen calls to one office, 50 calls, 100 calls, whatever it is, that is going to elevate this issue in their mind. So don't sit back. It's also incumbent on Bitcoiners to elevate this issue. So we would kindly admonish you to do that.
One more swing at that for just a good clip. Hang on.
Please.
If you hold Bitcoin, call your senator, tweet at your senator, email your senator. If you mine Bitcoin, call your senator, email your senator, tweet at your senator. If you are interested in digital assets and you don't want needless red tape in your way of availing yourselves of these freedoms, call your senator, email your senator, tweet at your senator to pass this digital asset tax package. It will make your life better, and it will make the bill more popular. Let's get the senators on board.
It will make it even bigger and even more beautifuler, as it were. Well,
the digital asset tax package will make the big, beautiful bill even bigger and more beautiful, and many people are talking about it.
Everybody knows it. That's great. Well, for our final segment, we'll end in the traditional way with the grab bag. For me, it is going. I feel like I go back to the well a lot, but in this case, I want to give congratulations to the LSU Tigers on winning the Men's College World Series that just wrapped up in muggy Omaha, Nebraska. And as a Midwesterner who grew up 3 hours away from Omaha, it's a different level of heat there. The opening game, the high was around 95 and the heat index was 102. But LSU, they swept the series against Coastal Carolina. 2 really tight games, though. So congratulations to LSU. And I have to go back and look, but I think it was somewhere like their 8th title. Amazing to see the legacy of what's been going on with LSU baseball.
Very good. So my grab bag, I am, we are both lawyers, so we can be nerdy at times. This has gotten a lot of news, though, a lot of traction in the news about an opinion that came out this week where the Supreme Court put some guardrails, some pretty strong guardrails around district court judges' abilities to issue nationwide injunctions to stop the Trump administration's policies. Justice Jackson did not like this idea and wrote a colorful dissent. I'll put it kindly and just call it colorful. And I would never call it incoherent and juvenile and sophomoric. I would never do that. Some people might do that. I would never do that. But Justice Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett, who I was delighted to get to know a little bit when she was going through the confirmation process, she wrote the majority opinion in this case, which smacked down Justice Jackson quite remarkably, and was signed on to by 6 of the 9 justices. And she characterized Justice Jackson's dissent, which included reference to Martians and people from other planets. It was very weird. Anyway, Justice Barrett's smackdown of her dissent, I will quote, "We will not dwell," this is from Justice Barrett, "I will not dwell on Justice Jackson's argument, which is at odds with more than 2 centuries worth of precedent, not to mention the Constitution itself. We only observe this. Justice Jackson decries an imperial executive while embracing an imperial judiciary." Mic drop. Boom. That is a pretty amazing way to open up and smack down a dissenter. Sadly, I think it was justified, but here we are. And there are there are cases of Justice Kagan in the past decrying these nationwide injunctions and how, any judge, and there are hundreds of judges out there, could stop the duly elected president from enacting policies the people voted for. So that is small d democratic, I think. So putting some guardrails in there made sense constitutionally for the Supreme Court to do that. And we even got a little, little cat fight, little back and forth between the justices. Pretty remarkable language there. Very poignant. Very good job by Justice Barrett. This will probably make her a little more popular on the right. She was not so popular on the right recently due to some of her other rulings, but I think this one was a home run. So nicely done. Glad to see that.
I mean, that's fairly stern for a body that, prides itself on comity and all that kind of stuff. That is pretty strong. And as a nerd, I love these kind of things. And to make, she had, talking about Martians and all this stuff. I saw somebody showed me a Babylon Bee thing, and it was like Justice Jackson's a dissenting opinion was just like 2 words, Wakanda forever, or something like that. So, you have somebody like, I've always been more partial to Justice Thomas, but you had Justice Scalia that was always famous for writing, those colorful types of opinions, and there is value in that. But this is one of those things that it goes against what you learn in con law 101 or courts 101, is that, the way that the courts are structured is that there are limits to the reach of what a federal district court's opinion is and how much weight that carries, how much sort of precedential value it carries. And it's typically confined to the district. And then you go to the circuit court level. Sometimes they'll make rulings that are confined to that circuit. And then you leave it to the Supreme Court to decide the degree to which it applies nationwide. And it is it's always so easy to, strike out at trial lawyers and stuff. But it's a cottage industry to find venues that you can do this kind of thing, to strike down nationwide policy. It's an important repudiation and conversation that the courts are having to get back, the Supreme Court in this case, to get back to how justice should be administered. And we're having broader conversations about the use or the abuse of prosecutorial discretion by prosecutors and by the DOJ at category levels. So this is striking back against this. I think it's kind of a clever term, kind of a silly term, but lawfare, using the courts and weaponizing the courts. This is a big deal. So everyone should pay attention. And it was, I think, Katie Pavlich, as she mentioned, thank you for your attention to this matter.
That's right. Love it. That's one of my favorite closing sentences, by the way. Love that Trump has been doing that. Anyway, that is all for us this week, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe. Follow us on Rumble, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. On Twitter, I'm at MorgansternNJ. Follow me there. Send me DMs, comments, questions. Again, wherever you get your podcasts, be sure to subscribe and give us a good review. if you are so inclined. We will see you next week. This was an action-packed one, and hopefully we'll have good news to report. Who knows? But we'll see you all at the next episode of the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.